The Gulls finally get on the board with their first victory of the season. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about the goaltending and much more on this edition of Locked On Anaheim Ducks.
You're Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Anaheim Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Here we go. Welcome to Locked On Anaheim Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jason Hernandez. I've been covering hockey for over a decade, and this episode is brought to you by the Gametime app. Download the app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase with Gametime. All right, let's get right into it. Let's talk about the San Diego Gulls on this late edition of Gulls Thursday. A late edition because this is obviously Thursday evening. There will be another episode Friday morning, then we'll be done for the week. But before I get into just the goaltending, briefly I want to mention that the Gulls are on the road for the next few days. For those of you that are not aware, they're going to be in Canada for the next week and change. At Abbotsford, at Calgary. 4 games in about a week. So next Thursday is going to be a little bit something. So check that out. All right. So the goaltending needs a little bit of help. Maybe not the goalies. Well, yeah, a little bit of the goalies themselves, but also they're going to need some other kind of help. And I think this is going to have to come in the form of John Gibson returning to the Anaheim Ducks. So far, we've seen that John Gibson is traveling with the Anaheim Ducks, but he has not been activated just yet. So we don't know if John Gibson is going to remain with Anaheim or not. If that's the case, if John Gibson comes back sooner rather than later, then it's going to be Gibby and Dostal. And then what's going to happen after that? Well, James Reimer is currently part of the Anaheim Ducks. He was picked up off of waivers. He would have to pass through waivers if the Ducks are going to try to send him down. And obviously, I think that would be the best decision. I know that the Ducks signed Oscar Dansk for a reason, to be the backup to Calle Clang, but it has just not been working. The reason for that signing was because the Gulls were supposed to have a tandem of Tomas Suchanek as the number 1 goaltender, Calle Clang being the number 2 goalie. Well, you know what? Calle Clang's doing his job. Oscar Dansk, so far, not so much. It's not looking too good for one of those netminders. I mean, both of them don't look the best, but one of them is looking just a little bit worse. So far this season, Calle Clang doing what he can. He's got a .239 goals against average, .902 save percentage. The save percentage is below normal. Goals against is a little bit above normal. .239 goals against, pretty solid for Calle Clang. And then Oscar Dansk, who just got signed earlier this month. He's got a .619 goals against average and a save percentage of .820. Ouch. And this is not to say that he's seen a lot of shots. He hasn't seen that many shots relative to the time on ice. He has seen a lot of shots, only 87 minutes. He has seen 50 shots. So on average, he's seen about a pace of 30, I think it's like 30 something shots, like 36 shots per game or 35 per game. Still a lot, but it's not as bad as previous seasons. Oscar Dansk is struggling big time. He's going to have a big performance sometime on the road this weekend. Otherwise, he might be the odd man out. No offense to Oscar Dansk. I mean, he did a fantastic job as the backup to Dustin Wolf. Really more so 2 years ago in 22-23 when the Wranglers had the best record in the entire American Hockey League. Dansk was solid. Only a .275 goals against, .905 save percentage. Very good numbers for a backup. Last season, those numbers really trailed off. Calgary fell in the standings, and Oscar Dansk starting to slow down slightly. This season, so far, a little bit more. This is his worst save percentage of his career. Goals against is way up there relative to every other year that he's been in the American Hockey League or in the professional level for that matter. So unfortunately, this just might be one of those cases where maybe it's time. Maybe it's time to cut him loose. I would like to see Oscar Dansk stick around just for the sake of having that veteran presence. Maybe the same way that that Jeff Glass stuck around a little bit. So maybe there's something there. But as far as Calle Clang, he's seen a good amount of shots. He needs a little bit of help as well. I don't see him getting that many starts this season. He was expected to get about maybe 30 starts this season, and all of a sudden he's going to be thrust into that number one role, and he's probably going to get 50 starts. So I think it's going to be important for the Ducks to really time it perfectly when they can pass James Reimer through waivers. And if that can happen, and if that happens successfully, then I would say the Gulls actually have a bit more of a fighting chance. James Reimer has spent a number of years in the professional ranks, currently obviously with the Anaheim Ducks as a backup. And now he has had some time in the American Hockey League way back in 2010, 2011 with the Toronto Marlies. He has not seen the American Hockey League since. Reimer is 36 years old, so he is a bit on the older side. I don't know if he's going to pass through waivers. He's been an NHL stalwart for the last 14 seasons. So I don't know if the Gulls are going to get any help in that regard. I'm just keeping it honest. It's going to be very tough for him to pass through waivers. Last few years, he spent some time with the Red Wings, the Sharks, the Hurricanes, the Panthers, the Maple Leafs. There's going to be some team out there that might not only want his services, but might need his services. There's going to be some team out there that needs a decent enough backup. I mean, he's looked okay. He's looked fine throughout his entire career. His save percentage has always hovered above 900, so he's capable. His goals against has always hovered under 3. So is he going to pass through waivers? Probably not, but I think that's going to be the Gulls' best chance to get somewhere this season. We'll see. We're going to head into the first intermission, and I'm going to talk more in depth about the last couple of games the Gulls played, including their first win of the season on the road in overtime. We will get to all of that on the other side. And now a brief word from FanDuel. That is right. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook, and the NBA season has just begun. The NHL season has just begun. Everything's beginning. Also, baseball is ending. Football is in week 8, and you can get a big return on FanDuel. Let's say you have a hunch in the middle of the game. You can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play on every sport, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Right now, we got the World Series starting between the Dodgers and the Yankees. The Dodgers are the slight favorite right now in the World Series. So you could check out those odds, check out those bets. And by the way, you can get started with $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com, the official sports betting partner of the Locked On Podcast Network. And please, folks, gamble responsibly. Welcome back to Locked On Anaheim Ducks, or in this case, Locked On Gulls, which is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. And once again, you are locked in with Jason Hernandez. Let's talk about the last couple of games. I'm going to go much more in-depth on these two games because there was some interesting stuff that happened at Pechanga Arena. First off, it was opening night at Pechanga Arena on Friday the 18th. A lot of fans did show up. This was a pretty solid crowd, almost 10,000 packed Pechanga Arena to see the San Diego Gulls take on the defending back-to-back Western champions, the Coachella Valley Firebirds. Oh, I'm sorry. The Coachella Valley Firebirds. Okay, that's the only time I do that. I promise. The Firebirds looked good. They looked really good. Oscar Dansk got the start on this game, and the Firebirds took full advantage of who was behind the net. They did their homework on Oscar Dansk and just put up goals like nobody's business. Jacob Melanson scored early on. Then Edouard Chalet scored his first of the season. Then Ben Myers got on the board. All of a sudden, with like 7 minutes left, it's 3-0 Coachella Valley right away. And those 3 goals happened in a span of about 4.5 minutes. They came bang, bang, bang. And especially that third one, I don't think Oscar Dansk knew what was coming. The defense just fell asleep for about those 4 minutes, where the Firebirds were getting shot after shot after shot. Was Dansk getting peppered a little bit? Yeah, he kind of was. Immediately after like that timeout, it was a firing gallery. It was a firing squad on Oscar Dansk. And Melanson scored on what was like a decent enough rebound, sort of. So 1-0. But the Firebirds kept going. They just kept shooting and shooting and shooting until finally Edouard Chalet scored. So that made it 2-0. This despite the fact that there was just very little defense. But it got worse. It got way worse after that, because former San Diego Gull Nicholas Brouillard put one right on net, and a juicy rebound bounced off Captain Max, went to Ben Myers. So that made it 3-0 Coachella Valley. Poor Oscar Dansk. He was getting bludgeoned with shots. The defense gave him nothing. Absolutely nothing. The puck was nowhere near exiting the zone in any of those 3 goals. It felt like it was just, okay, lose the faceoff, goes to the zone. Lose the faceoff, goes to the zone. It felt like the puck didn't leave the defensive zone for about 11 bajillion minutes. That's what it felt like. After that third goal, it was finally, okay, let's try something a little bit different here. So the Gulls actually did a good job of drawing a penalty. The other way around. It was the other way around on that case. I'm talking about a different penalty later on. Gaucher got one for cross-checking. That's what I was going to get to. So later on in the game, the Gulls did a much better job of drawing penalties, something that they were not doing early on. Second period especially, they did a better job of drawing penalties. And yeah, nothing to show for it. Oh, but that second period, I think the Firebirds got in their heads. I legit think that's what happened, because the Firebirds were sort of bullying around a little bit. They were having their way with the San Diego Gulls, and it was Cale Fleury time. Cale Fleury in the second period got a natural hat trick. One with about 17 minutes left, one on the power play with about 12 minutes left. And by the way, that fifth goal, the second Cale Fleury goal, that's the one that chased Oscar Dansk out of the game. So in comes Callie Klang. And then Cale Fleury finishes the natural hat trick on Callie Klang. But not before we had a lot of fireworks. Dylan Hetherington decided to start a fight with Jacob Melanson. Pretty solid card there. Pretty even fight. I don't know who I give that one to, but that one I think fired up the Firebirds a little bit more. And then later on, Captain Max McCormick and Nathan Gaucher got into it a little bit. That definitely helped the Firebirds, because a minute after that fight, Fleury completed his hat trick. So the Gulls are just losing in every facet possible. Every facet. So we go into the break 6-1 in favor of the Firebirds. And then two things happened. Both of these things can be true. The Firebirds relaxed a lot, and San Diego finally woke up. Both things were definitely true in this case. Yes, the Firebirds had a 5-goal lead, and they kind of rested on their laurels that they can hold this 5-goal lead. San Diego, they had nothing to lose here. They were playing with house money. I think the way they kind of came out wasn't super, like they were not out there like their butts were on fire. But they did try a little bit harder. And I think the point that they were trying to make was, let's at least get a couple of goals and feel better about ourselves. That's what it kind of felt like at times watching that third period. Not that they weren't going through the motions, but it's just that when you're down by that much, like a 5-goal deficit, the chances of making a comeback are slim to none, but you at least want to make it interesting and maybe make the opposing team a little bit nervous. So in that third period, by the way, the Gulls outshot the Firebirds 19-3 in the third period. First two periods, Firebirds outshot them 25-16. Not terrible, but 19-3, big advantage for San Diego, and they showed it. It wasn't until about 15 minutes left, Sam Colangelo scored, making it 6-2. Okay. Not bad. Not bad at all. Still a 4-goal game. So we go into the first media timeout. Second media timeout. Still 6-2. Fans are leaving, and who can blame them? You're down by 4 goals with under 10 minutes left. Okay, probably not going to come back, but at least get one more goal late. And that's kind of what happened. Ryan Carpenter, a few minutes later, scored his first of the season. That made it 6-3. Okay, so it's kind of interesting. They're still down by 3 goals, going to the final media timeout. All right. So now it's going to get a little bit interesting. San Diego starting to put some pressure on the puck, and just watching and listening to the broadcast, yeah, it felt like Coachella Valley was kind of hanging on. And listening to Evan Pivnik, the announcer for the Firebirds, he did kind of allude to that the Firebirds did relax and they were playing like they just wanted to get out of there. And then Max McCormick committed a not so good penalty, a bad high-sticking penalty. So that's when the goalie left. That's when Callie Klang left. And we had some 6-on-4 hockey. And what typically happens when you have 6-on-4 hockey, you're going to score. Pavel Regenda, the Regenda agenda, scored on the power play, making it 6-4. Okay, a little bit interesting. We're going to keep Callie Klang out. And then with about a minute and change left, Sam Colangelo scores his second of the period. All of a sudden, it's 6-5. Ugh. But the Firebirds barely hung on towards the very end. Final score was 6-5. A bit of a breath of relief for the Firebirds and a bit of confidence for the San Diego Gulls moving forward, which leads into how they played on the last game against the Bakersfield Condors. That one was definitely building off of the previous game. They knew that they could have come back, didn't quite get there, so now we go to Bakersfield. And both teams kind of filled each other out. First period, no scoring, not much as far as penalties. And in fact, going back and watching this game, there was some decent enough chances for the Gulls in that first period. I will give credit to Pavel Regenda for actually trying to go deep in and try to get a couple of good shots. Same with Nikita Nesterenko. Nesterenko was pretty aggressive, especially towards the end of the period. So I'll give props where props is due. Those two players looked like they were on a mission that night. One other player that was on a mission that was very aggressive, especially as the game wore on, was Igor Sidorov. Yes, a lot of Gulls fans are high on Sidorov, and they should be. Sidorov got the scoring started with 2.5 minutes left, making it 1-0 San Diego. And then Daniel D'Amato tied it a minute and a half later. So we're 1-1 going into the third period. Shots on goal, 19-13 in favor of Bakersfield at the end of 2 periods. Third period, that was a defensive battle. Both teams were starting to go out a little bit more rough stuff, a little bit more elbowing, a little bit more bruising. That's not bad hockey. Now, Connor Carrick did score his first, former Firebird, scored his first, making it 2-1 Bakersfield. And then Lane Peterson got caught hooking, and then Carson Myers scored on the power play. Gulls actually doing pretty decently on the power play this weekend. They were 1-for-4 against the Firebirds. They were 1-for-3 against Bakersfield, 2-for-7 on the weekend. Not bad at all. So that was Carson Myers' second, tying it up at 2 goals apiece. Then we go to overtime, and it was all San Diego in overtime. They hardly gave up the puck. They kept possession. They looked for the decent shots when they had them, and that's what ultimately did it. Bakersfield got worn down during that overtime. Nesterenko, super aggressive in overtime, didn't cash in. Igor Sidorov did cash in with 2:12 remaining in overtime. Sidorov won the game for the San Diego Gulls 3-2 in overtime, giving them their first victory of the season. We're going to head into the second intermission. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the importance of playing a full 60. Very important about that. Stay locked in. And now a brief word from the Gametime app. And folks, if you're not using Gametime, especially for the World Series, then what are you waiting for? Because Gametime has Gametime picks. But you know what's actually really great are the zone deals. If you somehow want to check out the Dodgers in the World Series, and I actually checked this earlier today, you could check out their zone deals. They had zone deal tickets in the reserve level for as low as $700 all in. They also had Loge tickets, zone deals, for $812 all in. Under $1,000 for tickets to Game 1 of the World Series. They also have zone deals and flash deals for Game 2 of the World Series, if you feel inclined to do so. And you could also save $20 by using the code LOCKEDONNHL. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Game time. We're also brought to you by PrizePicks, which is our number one daily fantasy. By the way, daily fantasy hockey looking pretty solid right now because you can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. The Ducks have a road trip coming up. Maybe you want to make some picks on all of Saturday's juicy action. Maybe you're going to put, I don't know, maybe say that Troy Terry is going to be more or less than his prediction. Maybe you think Cutter Gauthier is going to score a goal. Maybe you think Frank Vatrano is going to get off the schneid and score a goal. Well, PrizePicks is the only real money daily fantasy platform with an injury insurance policy, so your lineups stay in play even if one of your players gets hurt. If your player leaves and doesn't return, PrizePicks keeps your lineup live. How about that? So, head over to PrizePicks right now. Okay, ready? Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Once again, download the app, use code LOCKEDONNHL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Once again, we're talking about PrizePicks. Run your game. Let's talk about the importance of playing a full 60 minutes. Something that the Gulls have unfortunately had problems with for the better part of the last 3 seasons. If I'm going to be really honest here, like really honest, there were times in the 2022 season where they would have maybe a 19-2 shooting disadvantage and then come back and outshoot their opponents like 15-5. That happened way too often a couple of seasons ago. It still even happened a lot last season. And this felt like a broken record to those of you everydayers. When I talk about the Gulls, that was one of the key things, where the disparity was like night and day. That was especially true against the Firebirds. Part of that might have to do with the goaltending that I talked about in the first segment. Goaltending can make a big difference. And if a team is playing, well, I'll just say it. If a team's playing like crap, then it's up to the coach to try to bring some kind of energy back to the team. And pulling a goalie, it always sends a message to the rest of the team. You're not going to play for that goalie? Don't leave this one high and dry either. That happens a lot. I mean, I've seen both sides of it, where another goalie comes in, he gets peppered as well. Or a new goalie comes in and it rallies everyone together. That's kind of what happened in the case of the Firebirds game is once Oscar Dansk left the game, once Kelly Klang entered the game, then it's like, oh crap. Okay, well, he got pulled. We cannot do this to Callie as well. So I think it's going to be important for the Gulls to try to play as complete of games as possible. I know it's tough when you have some quality teams on the other side. I know it's very difficult. But looking, okay, the Firebirds game is a good example because there were few minutes of stretches there where I'm not going to say they didn't, but there was the impression, or it seemed like the effort wasn't as great as it was for a different part of the game. And that's something that I don't want to put out there and I don't like saying. I'm sure the guys put 100% effort the whole game. But when on camera, when it looks like one team is out rushing you, when one team is out hustling you, it looks bad. And especially a third period like that, you say, where was that? Well, part of the case was the Firebirds relaxed, so that's why it seemed like there was that disparity there. But it is still important to give that effort 100% throughout all 60 minutes. The Ducks have been guilty of that the past few. Actually, the Ducks were very guilty of that during Dallas Eakins' final season and maybe the other season where they were way down in the standings, where the Ducks just did not play a complete game. And unfortunately, it is now carried over to the San Diego Gulls, where they are either not finishing games or getting off to really putrid starts. That cannot happen, especially if the Gulls are going to try to make some kind of push into the playoffs this season, because it's been a couple of seasons. It's been a couple of years. And unfortunately for the Gulls, right now they are last in the standings again. Small sample size, season just begun, but you never like getting off to such a slow start for what seems like the fourth year in a row. You cannot let that happen. So the Gulls are going to have to pick it up during this very difficult road trip that they have coming up. They got 2 against the Abbotsford Canucks, who are looking decent enough. They are 2-1-1 so far this season. Then they have 2 games against the Calgary Wranglers, who are top in the Pacific Division. Once again, they are 5-1. They've been terrific, folks. The Calgary Wranglers, they pretty much they didn't decimate the Firebirds, but they definitely had their way with them a little bit. The Firebirds did get goalied a little bit. And also there's just a couple of guys so far that are doing everything for the Calgary Wranglers. Rory Cairns, he scored a hat trick on the Firebirds a couple weeks ago. So Rory Cairns, he's been solid. He had a multi-goal game against Abbotsford, another multi-goal game against Henderson. So once he gets going, he really gets going. The Gulls have to watch out and try to contain Rory Cairns during those games. Walker Dewar, he's been just as good. He's also got 8 points. He also had a hat trick against Henderson. Yeah, multiple hat tricks already for Calgary. They're looking very, very good. And Jacob Pelletier, 8 assists so far, no goals this season. He's been solid as well. So offensively, they are looking very, very solid. Amongst the league leaders in goals so far this season. So we'll see if the Gulls can at least steal maybe a point in Calgary. That's their only hope. That being said, that's going to do it for this podcast. Thank you all so much for watching. Thanks for listening. Don't forget, this podcast is free and available across all platforms, including Stitcher, Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, ad-free on Amazon. We're also on YouTube, so hit that subscribe button, if you have not already. You could follow me on Twitter X at StimpyJD. The show's Twitter X is at LO_Ducks. You could email me at lockedonanaheimducks@gmail.com. We'll be back with another podcast, another episode tomorrow as the Ducks embark on an East Coast road trip. Once again, thank you all so much for your continued support. It is very much appreciated. For Locked On Gulls, I'm Jason Hernandez saying have a great rest of the night. Please remember to be safe out there. Please be kind to one another. Be kind to yourselves, especially. And Ducks and Gulls fly together. Caw, caw, caw.